Hi there, so this is the video for week 6. We'll have a practice, a demonstrate assignment, and then your normal QQC and self-reflection, and also your research paper, topic rationale, and bibliography will be due on the 24th before the end of the day. I was asked if your bibliography could be changed between this month and the end of the semester, and the answer to that is yes. You can definitely change sources that you cite in your research paper when that time comes. The purpose of the bibliography being turned in this month is just for me to see where you are and also to help you all stay on top of it so that you make sure that those resources are all collected. Although most of you seem like you're on top of this course and even ahead of things, which is really great. So what we're going to discuss this week are really two main things: childcare needs and how childcare has developed over the years, and some skills of self-observation. And I'll tell you a little bit about why that pertains to communication as a whole when we get to it. So, a little bit of the history of some childcare practices. These are some ways that people previously approached how to take care of children at a young age. For a very, very long time, extended family living with the family of the child has been an enormous part of, very historically, how people have for thousands of years dealt with maybe a problem of how to take care of a child. Is that the nuclear family might be considered to have been extended to something like 3 generations or maybe more, so that a lot of adults were involved in the child's life in the same home, or at least in the same immediate area. The impact of more recent historical changes, such as the industrialization, so the emergence of lots more factories and corporate workhouses and things like that, began to change the way that families were organized and the ways that children were taken care of. So a lot of families moved to bigger cities, for instance, to be nearer the work. And it was around this time that the first child care centers really started to show up to provide some of the basic needs for kids whose families were having to live in the cities and work in more industrial settings. Around the time of World War II, when lots of men went to fight in World War II, it's somewhat famously understood that so many women had to begin working in jobs that were previously solely occupations that men held. And so this changed quite a lot, of course, when many, many women left the home during the day to go work in these types of jobs. We as a country needed many more centers to watch after children because possibly their fathers were overseas and mothers were gone, quite a large portion of the day working. When men came back at the end of World War II, however, a lot of the women who were holding those jobs lost those jobs, and then a lot of centers closed, a lot of child care centers closed. So it was kind of a big up and down swing during that time. Around the 60s, we saw a large increase in divorces, which led to a lot more single-parent homes, and so that changed a lot of things with regard to childcare. If you're in a single-parent home and that parent likely needs to work to provide income, then the child needs to go somewhere during the day. So those centers began to emerge a lot more around that time out of necessity. It was beginning around that time when that started, through the 70s especially, where there was a higher emphasis on more adequate or higher quality training for child care workers, because we began to notice, hey, there's a lot of kids in child care because of this phenomenon of divorce increasing and a lot of other things. So we need to make sure that we take care of them, not just by giving them some food to eat and make sure they don't hurt themselves physically, but actually to pay attention to what we're doing here to make sure it's a quality experience for them. So that was a good turn to focus on a little bit more of the quality of childcare. So some issues to consider with regard to childcare: the need of childcare. So we've discussed just now a couple of issues about why it might be necessary for centers to open. Um, other instances in which childcare might be available might still be the extended family, other after-school programs, and stuff like that. Finances are, of course, a major concern in lots of areas, and particularly with childcare, it can be very expensive, especially if it's almost every day of the week. There happens to be a low supply and high demand of subsidized childcare. Subsidized means that they're at least partially funded through the state or the federal government or something, or some grant. And there's a lot of need for people to have help affording it, and not quite as much of a supply for that need. High quality childcare, as I've mentioned, is an emphasis and is also linked to positive outcome in a lot of ways for the child. And poor quality, or quality with less training and less adequate or less lower quality childcare, is linked to an increase of risk in a good bit of ways, academic or cognitive and social and so on. There are different types of childcare. We can consider in-home as being basically if I have a neighbor and I have to go to work and we work something out so that I pay them a certain amount of money per day or per week, I just drop my child off on the way to work, and nobody's involved outside of our agreement, and that means that it's unregulated. So there's no one holding that person accountable for making sure that their house is clean, that they're providing a certain physical environment for them, or providing what they need outside of what I pay attention to. So that's kind of a drawback, but the benefit is that can be very, very flexible. So if we work out something and we need to change it, it might be more likely that he or she and I can come to an agreement quickly. And another type is family child care. This is basically an in-home situation, but an in-home situation in which maybe many more children come, and it's at a capacity that requires a state license to run it, and basically turns into a business. And some of you may have even known people to just kind of take in some kids around the neighborhood, or folks that they know, while their parents go to work, and then getting to the point where they actually have enough kids so that they can begin making maybe a living off of it or something, so they actually have to follow through some licensure board certifications. That sets some regulation, like how many children are allowed and how the house is kept and things like that. When you get to the level of an actual child care center, there's quite a lot more regulation, and there's good reason for that. So an instance in which there's a degree of control with how the day is run, with certain infant and toddler programs, there needs to be an openness or transparency to what's happening during the day at the facility. And a part of how they can do that is provide a care book or some journal, or just a daily written account of what activities and foods and things like that the child participated in or consumed, so that the parents or caregivers really know what's going on as fully as possible. Other examples of preschool programs. Preschool programs are not as much a part of the school system as meeting basic needs and interacting with caring adults. So it is a little bit more of an extension of something like the in-home situation, but just at a center. And the school-aged childcare, an example of that might be something like an after-school program. So the child's at school during the day, but maybe the parent's work schedule overlaps outside of the school day, so the child has to go somewhere else, and so lots of after-school programs are set up for things like that. So in reference to quality of child care, there's some things that need to be considered. So the environment, the physical environment of wherever what center or home the child is in, has to be maintained to a high status for health reasons, safety reasons. There actually has to be a certain structural component to the center, so there has to be a certain number of square foot per child. It has to have basic things like sinks, running and working sinks, toilets, windows, things like that. These are just some requirements in order for a center to be running. And there are really good reasons, of course, to have a toilet in the building or to have a working sink to make sure that things are clean and that children have the resources and needs that they have met. Staff usually has a ratio requirement, so there's a certain number of teachers per student, or a certain number of students per teacher, and there's also an increase of focus on the qualifications that those teachers have, that they have adequate training and high quality preparation for the job. The overall center requires a license, and that center typically will be required to use some type of curriculum that's often or usually or maybe should be based in play. So the way that the children are instructed or taught is often through play. And that play should be balanced of in and outside. So there's actually a degree of, or a portion or a ratio of the day that actually needs to be spent outside if possible. Another important part of what makes a child care center a higher quality is that the parents are actually, and families are involved, or at least on the same page. That goes back to what is important about the care books that might be presented to the parent at the end of the day. Now, there are different ways that a center can become accredited or have a certification to run itself. One way is through the National Association for Family Child Care accreditation. This was developed in the late 80s and is a little bit smaller, only about 2,100 accredited centers in the U.S. And then the other one that is a little bit closer to what we're in our program here through Upstate is the NAEYC, the National Association for Education of Young Children. We use this to set the standards for learning for our courses here through this program and so on. It's a little bit bigger than the NAFCC, about 8,000 through the country. So for your practice assignment, I want you to take a look at page 140 in your Families, Schools, and Communities book and completely examine your beliefs and practices prompt as an assignment on Blackboard, and consider some of the things that we mentioned through this PowerPoint and through the chapter that you read on some of the history and early beginnings of childcare and how it's changed. So we're going to take a shift now and change to the self-observation portion of this lesson. Now, the reason that I'm emphasizing this is that any type of communication that we have, this is a class on communication, any type of communication we have begins with the kind of launching point of the person communicating. So that means you. So when you're in an interaction with someone, you always start with you, with a certain place of inner subjective experience. If that's ignored, then things tend to run on autopilot or more automatically. And if that's the case, it's a higher degree of likelihood that you'll fall into bad habits of communicating or ineffective habits. And the antidote to that, or the remedy to that, might be something like an overall expanded awareness of what you are experiencing, in fact. And two ways to think about how you experience things subjectively in your own inner mind might be thought of as being thoughts, and we'll talk about what that means, thoughts in general and feelings in general. So first we're going to think about how we pay attention to those two things in our experience, and I propose that we should take what I call an affectionate detached view. So that's sort of a stepping back from yourself, but not in a cold and disconnected way. Stepping outside of yourself really means like moving out of your own thoughts and feelings to observe them more fully. And notice what those inner things do, not more so than what they are when you're observing in this way. When you're examining what they are, that's the content of your thought or feeling. It's easy to get wrapped up in it and carried away with it. If you notice what they do, you notice thoughts and feelings kind of rise and pass. You notice that they grow more intense and less intense, and that understanding opens up a degree of freedom with what to do about it, what to do with them. Two modes of feeling that can kind of take over quite a lot that I want to discuss is the fight or flight mode or state, right? So the body and the mind follow somewhat predictable patterns of fight or flight. That basically is when we're in a state of reactivity and we either want to defend, like by fighting either physically or verbally, or we want to flee or get away or avoid or something like that. And our whole body tells us to do that. Our heart changes its rate, our breathing changes, muscle tension changes, our skin conductance changes, and stuff like that. And sort of balanced on the other end of the spectrum is the relaxation response. That could be thought of as a reverse of the fight-flight. The fight-flight is the sympathetic nervous system. That's the gas pedal of the body. And the relaxation response might be thought of as the parasympathetic nervous system, which is something like a gentle application of the brakes of the body. We slow down. That means our heart rate slows, our breathing gets more relaxed and tempered. Our muscles tend to relax. Brain changes lead us to actually being able to pick up the frequencies of the human voice that are more welcoming and more friendly. In fact, our vocal cords tension changes so that our voice is more amenable or receptive to friendly communication. You might have noticed as you've been in a relaxed state, your voice tends to go up a little bit. It tends to be a result of just muscle tension in the body. And other things throughout the body we'll talk about in a minute. And I'd like to propose that the feelings in the body, and that's what I consider in this way to be feelings, our body can be thought of as the receiver, whereas our brain can be thought of as like the message of, or another way to put it is the body is the antenna, and the brain is what's sending out the radio frequencies. So think about it in that way so that you can have an understanding of how feelings are felt through the body. The body can be thought of as the tool through which we hear or feel or read our feelings, and that's can be useful because we can observe that really easily. And so thoughts and feelings, they can be reactive. That means that outer things impact them and make them active. They can be proactive, in which we kind of think about the future. We have future expectation, and that can agitate or activate our body and mind. And they're also interactive. Feelings and thoughts, or roughly speaking, brain and body, they interact with one another. So stimulation in the body through anxiety leads to certain types of thoughts. Certain types of thoughts can lead the body into an anxious state. So first, focusing on feelings, and we're going to watch the body for feeling. We can think of emotions as being something like feeling-toned sensations. Those are like sensations in the body that have a kind of flavor or color that is emotional. And you all know the difference between, for instance, if you're right now to pay attention to sensations at the bottom of your foot, just as you're listening to my voice, you probably notice that you feel them or you didn't feel them before, but there's not really anything inherently emotional about that feeling or that sensation. It's simply a physical feeling. That's different than if you were to think of someone or some situation right now as you're listening to me for which you have a sense of emotional feeling. Someone you really care about, someone, if you are in a conflict with someone, thinking about that, the last time you discussed that conflict with them, something you're worried about, that's always easy to find. Think about that and it's coming up in the future. You'll probably notice something like a tension in the chest, your stomach drops, you might begin to notice a headache, your muscles might tense up, things like that. That's what we mean when we're talking about emotional feeling or emotional sensation. Emotions can be thought to evoke motion. Okay, that means that the job of emotion in the body is something like a feeling guidance system. It leads our body to act in certain ways. Sometimes it's to try to get away, like the flight. Sometimes it's try to defend, like the fight. And there are other ways that we can lead ourselves through the world with emotion as well. We're going to watch the body and pay attention to how it can be reactive to outer things. And we're also going to watch the emotional body sensations as they arise and how they change. So you'll notice that if you did notice a feeling of intense or even mild emotion in the body when I asked you to think about something you were worried about a few moments ago, you'll probably notice that that sensation passed. Even if it's back right now, or if it is right now, you can watch it pass again. And it grows in intensity and it lowers in intensity. And so what that means is different parts of the body change in reference to what you're feeling emotionally. And what might be useful to think of is certain areas. Tend to think of 5 areas that are really directly impacted by feeling or emotion. Areas of the body utilized in feeling, lifting, beating, breathing, and eating. So the skin is feeling, that sometimes skin gets warm or cool, it sweats, it flushes, something like that. Skeletal muscles for lifting, that most often they just grow tight or tense. You don't always notice that, particularly like this web of muscles in the back, up through the neck, things like that. Yeah, there's two muscles right here that make our brow furrow. That often starts, or the jaw tightens up, stuff like that. Breathing is obviously the lungs. If you pay attention to lungs when you're in a state of anxiety, you might notice that the breath gets shallower, where you don't breathe as deeply, and they get quicker, so you breathe a little faster, and that tends to make us feel more anxious, or at least excited or agitated. Beating is the heart. That's heart and circulation, so the heart rate might increase. That means it beats faster. Heart and the intensity might increase. That means it begins to pound. And notice also some of these things are included with positive emotion, not just things like anxiety or anger. And that's important to know, because you might have the same physical sensations in a moment of excitement as you do in worry, and something makes it different, right? It feels different when your heart beats fast because you're on a roller coaster and having fun, versus when your heart beats fast because you're in an argument with someone you care about. But it is just the same type of sensation. So when we're observing that very thing, that this is just the heart beating fast, and it feels this way when I'm having a good time doing something too. And it's easier to kind of detach yourself from it so that you're not being led by it. And the last system in the body that can be really heavily impacted by emotion can be thought of as the eating system. So that's the entire digestive tract, starting at the mouth all the way down. So like the mouth can get dry, the throat can get tight, your stomach can start hurting, you have to excuse yourself even, things like that. And you may have had experiences like that, where you are suddenly shocked, or something really scary happens or something like that, and you notice something different about your digestive system in some way or in some area, and that's the very reason why. So thinking about all those parts of the body, or the systems of the body, are really, again, to be utilized as areas of focus with a certain affectionate detachment. So you're kind of dropping back and going, what's going on in the body right now that feels emotional, rather than the simple physical sensations like I can feel the weight of my body in the chair, I feel the shirt on my skin, things like that. Those are purely physical, but we're focusing on more emotional feeling or sensation in the body. So that's the body, or feeling. We're going to switch to thoughts now. One of the 2 ways I'm proposing we can observe ourselves. Thoughts can be considered as being made up of 2 things. Audible thoughts, that's thoughts we hear, or visual thoughts, that's thoughts that we see. So if you were to close your eyes right now, you could probably spend a moment pulling up the face of someone you know really closely. That's an example of seeing in the mind, or mental image. And if you, again, close your eyes just to eliminate distraction, and for a few moments, imagine yourself talking, right? So you might think with words in your mind, boy, this is weird that I'm watching this and sitting here closing my eyes and trying to imagine something. If you think words like that, that would be an example of mental talk, or that audible type of thinking. And again, when you're observing these 2 things, thoughts and sensations, and the different types of thoughts, you're noticing what they do rather than what they are. So when you're noticing what they do, you'll notice that thoughts arise, and the thought that you had a moment ago about the person's face, or the sentence that you were thinking to yourself, has in fact passed. And that will happen with all thoughts that you will ever have, and it has with every thought you've ever thought before in your life. And that's useful to know, because when you step back in that affectionate detachment kind of stance, you can notice thoughts come, notice thoughts go, and you don't get as wrapped up in them and carried away into emotional reactivity. One thing you'll notice about the way that thoughts interact with you is that thought, or especially audible thought, can become a little storyteller, or a little chatterbox, where it begins to launch you into the future, often with anxiety, or on the other hand with excitement. And it can also lead us to kind of replay situations, to think through situations that we're going to be playing out and how it's going to go. And we get stuck there, and that's when we get lost in thought like that. Thoughts, of course, also interact with the body, like I mentioned earlier. So a thought about an anxious situation that you're about to walk into, you can imagine what it's going to be like, different things you might be worried about. And then if you dropped your attention down to the body, you might notice that your heart rate is increased, or your shoulders are up and your muscles are tense, or your stomach hurts, or something like that. Those are all ways that the body and the mind can interact. Okay, so that was a whirlwind tour on a little bit of self-observation. There is a tremendous amount that a person can say on how you can watch yourself in different ways, but these are just two ways to think about it. Watching the bodily sensations that are feeling toned or more emotional, and watching thoughts, both mental image and mental talk. Now, for you to demonstrate, I've put up an audio clip. Well, it's a video, but I want you just to pay attention to what the audio is, called "Harsh No, Gentle Yes." And it might be a little weird to watch, but I want you to notice the purpose of this exercise is to simply watch this video and listen to me in it, and notice, and you're going to write this in a journal entry, specifically what happens in the areas of the body that I described before, to do with touching, lifting, beating, breathing, and eating, and what happens in the mind with mental talk and mental image. What do you notice thoughts change into when you're watching this Harsh No, Gentle Yes? And also notice if there's any interaction between bodily feeling and audible or visual thought. Okay? So this is a self-observation exercise. So when you're watching the video that I'll post, the Harsh No, Gentle Yes, I want you to simply sit very still. Don't talk, don't move, just watch and listen, and pay close attention to what emotional sensation is happening in the body, and what mental images are arising, and what mental talk or sound is arising in your mind that you kind of see in your mind's ear, or see in your mind's eye, or hear in your mind's ear, and how those two things interact with one another. Okay? So I hope this is clear, because this is a very typical way to do an assignment, but I'm asking you to peer into the window of your inner subjective experience. Okay? Things you feel that are emotional in the body, things you hear and see in your mind. Okay? And I want you to give a journal entry about those two areas and then how they interact together. So remember that your research paper topic and rationale and bibliography are again due by the 24th at the end of the day, and you have a QQC and self-reflection for this week as well. Now, I'm doing my best to give you guys some feedback with these things. Admittedly, there's a lot of them to do, so I'm working my way through them, and so just keep asking good questions, because a lot of you have, and I'll do my best to give you a decent answer, at least a good place to look for a good answer. So if there's any confusion with any of this, some of you see me on campus, you feel free to ask me as you have before, or send me a text or an email or give me a call. Okay? Have a good week.